Canada has 10 million square kilometers. It is the second largest country on Earth. And it is losing places faster than it can remember them. Not in explosions, not in disasters that make the news. In silence, in slow erosion, in the particular kind of forgetting that happens when no one is watching. When a government decides a community isn't worth the cost. When a glacier retreats another 100 meters. When a building that was once full of people just stands there, getting quieter every year. These are 16 places that still exist. For now. Some are still breathtaking. Some are already half gone. And a few, by the time you look them up, may only exist in footage like this. This is not a travel guide. It is a countdown. And it only moves in one direction. There is an island off the coast of Nova Scotia that almost no one has permission to visit. It's roughly 42 kilometers long and barely a kilometer wide. A crescent of sand in the open Atlantic, shifting position every year, swallowed and rebuilt by the same ocean that has been sinking ships here for centuries. Over 350 wrecks lie buried in the sandbanks around it. Some locals used to call it the graveyard of the Atlantic. Sable Island exists against logic. It shouldn't be there. It's so low and so narrow that any serious storm can roll right over it. The wild horses that live there, descendants of animals brought over in the 1700s, have adapted to survive on marram grass and freshwater lenses barely buried in the sand. They've been surviving out here, without human help, for longer than Canada has been a country. But the island is shrinking. The western tip is eroding at a rate that makes cartographers nervous. The dunes migrate. The topography changes year to year. What's on the map today isn't quite accurate anymore. Climate models suggest that within this century, storms will be able to submerge the entire island during surge events, not permanently at first, but with increasing frequency. There is a national park status now. There are researchers. There are monitoring stations. But no permanent residents. No infrastructure that could stop what's already happening. The horses are still there. For now, they don't seem to know what's coming. That's either beautiful or unbearable, depending on how you look at it. Most Canadians know Point Pelly as the southernmost tip of mainland Canada. A triangular wedge of land that juts into Lake Erie. It's famous for bird migration. In spring, it fills with warblers. In fall, monarch butterflies stop here by the millions before crossing the lake. What's less talked about is how quickly it's disappearing. Lake Erie's water levels have been rising. Combined with intensifying storms, the park's southern tip, the actual point, is eroding at a rate that has alarmed Parks Canada for years. The beach narrows after every major storm. The sandbars shift. What used to be a reliable landmass is becoming increasingly seasonal. Some projections suggest the tip could be functionally gone, submerged during high water events, within decades. For migratory birds, Point Pelly isn't just a nice place to stop. It's a navigational anchor. A strip of land that juts far enough south to catch exhausted birds crossing an enormous lake. Remove it, or reduce it significantly, and the ecological consequences ripple far beyond the park itself. The monarchs still come in autumn. Last season, there were fewer of them. That's a separate problem. But here, in this place, everything is connected to everything else, and the ground beneath it all is becoming less certain. At the northern tip of Labrador, where the province ends and the Arctic truly begins, there's a mountain range that most Canadians have never heard of, and almost none have seen. The Tornguts. The word comes from the Inuktitut word for spirit world. People have lived here, or passed through here, for at least 9,000 years. The landscape looks like it belongs on another planet. Glaciers carved these peaks into shapes that feel almost architectural. Fjords cut deep into the rock. Polar bears move along the coast. The light in summer does something to the air here that's genuinely hard to describe. The issue is the permafrost. The Torngat region is warming at twice the global average rate. The permafrost that underlies this entire landscape is thawing. When permafrost thaws, the ground doesn't just soften, it collapses. Entire slopes destabilize. Drainage patterns change. Ecosystems that took thousands of years to establish start breaking down in ways that can't simply be reversed. The Nunatsiavut government, the Labrador Inuit government, has been documenting these changes for years. What they're describing isn't just environmental loss. It's the landscape itself becoming unrecognizable, in places their ancestors navigated by memory, by the shape of the land, by routes passed down through generations. When the land changes that fast, you lose more than geography. You lose the knowledge that lived inside it. Dawson City still exists. You can still go there. There's a hotel and a bar and a museum. But there's something strange about standing in Dawson in 2024, something that's hard to shake. At its peak in 1898, this was one of the largest cities west of Winnipeg. 40,000 people flooded in during the Klondike Gold Rush. There were opera houses. There were banks. There were multilingual newspapers. People came from everywhere. From San Francisco, from Paris, from Melbourne. Because the ground here was producing more gold than anyone had ever seen come out of one place. Then, it stopped. Not gradually. Fast enough that people left before they finished what they were building. Dawson shrank to 1,000 people. Then less. The infrastructure meant for 40,000 sat there, slowly being reclaimed. What's happening now is stranger. The permafrost under Dawson, the frozen ground that these old buildings were literally built on, is thawing. Some of the historic structures are sinking, tilting. A few are beyond saving. The physical record of that extraordinary moment is being erased not by neglect exactly, but by the ground giving way underneath it. There are people in Dawson who love it deeply and are fighting to hold it together, but they're fighting the ground itself. And the ground, increasingly, is winning. Fogo Island sits off the northeast coast of Newfoundland, exposed to the open North Atlantic. It's not disappearing in a physical sense. The island isn't eroding into the sea. But the community on it came very close to disappearing in a different way. And what happened there is a story that resonates far beyond its coastline. In 1967, the federal government decided Fogo Island should be resettled. The fishing economy had collapsed. It wasn't economically viable to maintain services for small outport communities. The plan was to move the people to larger centers on the mainland. It was policy. It was rational. And it would have erased something irreplaceable. The community resisted. Filmmakers came, the National Film Board, and helped residents document their own lives, their own arguments for staying. Those films got shown to the government. The resettlement was canceled. Today, Fogo Island is studied around the world as a case of what's possible when communities fight for their own survival. But here's the thing. No one says loudly enough. The fight never really ends. The population has aged. Young people leave. The economy is still fragile. The factors that made the government want to erase the island in 1967 haven't gone away. They've just become slower. Some battles you win once and have to keep winning forever. Fogo Island is still winning. But only just. In the summer of 2023, a series of wildfires moved through northern British Columbia with a speed and ferocity that caught even experienced fire crews off guard. The Pine River Valley, already stressed by decades of logging, bark beetle infestations, and drought, became one of the zones where fire didn't just damage the forest, it transformed it. What a megafire leaves behind isn't just ash. It's a landscape that looks like it has been translated into another language, one you can't quite read. Stands of lodgepole pine that were 200 years old became gray spires. The understory that used to define the valley floor was gone. In some areas, the soil itself was damaged deeply enough that natural regeneration may take not years, but generations. Communities in this region have been rebuilding for 2 years now. Some came back, some haven't. One small town lost nearly a third of its structures, and its population has not returned to what it was before. What makes the Pine River story particularly hard to sit with is that almost every forestry expert who looked at this region beforehand said something like this was coming. The fuel load was too high, the summers too dry, the fire suppression policies of the last century had made it inevitable. The warning was there. It just wasn't loud enough, or it wasn't heard by the right people, or both. The new forest will grow back eventually. But it won't be the same forest. It will be something else, shaped by fire, that hasn't been named yet. In 1862, a man named Billy Barker struck gold on Williams Creek in the Caribou region of British Columbia. Within a year, Barkerville was the largest city north of San Francisco and west of Chicago. That's not mythology. That's the actual size of what appeared, almost instantly, in what had been wilderness. Today, Barkerville is a heritage site. You can walk the boardwalk. There are staff in period costume. It's a museum, essentially, arranged inside the original footprint of the town. But Barkerville is also deteriorating. Many of the original structures, and there are many, which is itself remarkable, are past the point where cosmetic restoration is enough. The heritage budget has fluctuated over the years, subject to the priorities of whoever happens to be running the province. Some buildings have been saved, others have been lost quietly, taken down because they were too far gone and there was no money left in the line item. What troubles preservation experts about Barkerville isn't the cost, it's the reasoning behind the sporadic funding. A place like this is treated as a tourism asset, valuable when it draws visitors, expendable when the numbers don't justify the investment. But that framing misunderstands what it is. Barkerville isn't infrastructure, it's a record. A physical record of something that happened here that cannot be rebuilt once it's gone. You cannot reconstruct authenticity. You can only preserve it, or lose it, once. There's a community on the western shore of Hudson Bay called Chesterfield Inlet, Igloolikaujuk in Inuktitut. About 400 people live there. It's one of the oldest continuously inhabited sites in Nunavut, with archaeological evidence of human presence going back over 4,000 years. It has a Catholic mission built in the 1920s. It has a history of contact, of residential schools, of the particular kind of violence that arrived with the missionaries and the Hudson's Bay Company. But right now, the most immediate threat is the ground. The permafrost under Chesterfield Inlet is thawing at a rate that is actively damaging infrastructure. Roads are buckling. Building foundations are shifting. The runway, a lifeline in a community with no road access, has required repeated emergency repairs. Some structures have had to be abandoned. The community has been requesting resources from the federal government to address this for years. The responses have been incremental. The problem has not been. What's particularly stark about Chesterfield Inlet is the timeline. This isn't a theoretical future risk. It's happening now, to a community that already carries the weight of what colonization did to it, and is now also absorbing the full force of a climate crisis it contributed almost nothing to creating. The people of Igloolikaujuk are being asked to survive, again, a transformation they didn't cause and cannot stop. They're doing it. But the cost is visible if you go there and look. On the northern coast of Ellesmere Island, as far north as land goes in Canada, which is to say as far north as land goes almost anywhere on Earth, there were until recently ancient ice shelves that had existed for at least 3,000 years. They formed during a climatic period so cold it was almost incomprehensible by current standards. They were stable. They were permanent. Or so it seemed. The Ward Hunt ice shelf was the largest in the Arctic. In 2002, it cracked in half. In the years since, pieces of these shelves have been breaking off and drifting into the Arctic Ocean with increasing frequency. What took 3 millennia to form has been substantially dismantled in about 40 years. This is not an abstraction. These ice shelves were habitat. They supported unique ecosystems, microbial mats, specialized algae, forms of life that existed nowhere else on the planet. Some of those ecosystems are gone. We documented them just barely before they disappeared, in some cases, and in others we simply didn't get there in time. There's a specific quality to the loss of something that is 3,000 years old. It exceeds normal categories of grief. These were features of the Earth that predate every major civilization currently alive. They survived the fall of Rome, the plague, 2 world wars, and the entire span of recorded Canadian history. They did not survive the industrial era. Canal Flats is a small town in the Rocky Mountain Trench, at the point where the Columbia River and the Kootenay River come within a few hundred meters of each other, before flowing in opposite directions for thousands of kilometers. It's one of those places that feels geographically significant in a way you can't quite articulate until someone explains it. For most of its history, Canal Flats existed because of a sawmill. When the mill closed in 2010, the town's economic reason for being simply stopped. Population dropped. Services contracted. The school enrollment fell below the threshold that kept it open. Canal Flats didn't vanish, but it entered that particular state that many small resource economy towns in Canada know well. The state of managed decline, where just enough services remain to sustain a population that is slowly aging in place, without enough economic activity to attract anyone new. The harder truth is that Canal Flats is not an anomaly. There are hundreds of towns like it across British Columbia, Northern Ontario, Quebec's Mauricie region, the Maritimes. Towns that were built around a single resource that served their economic purpose, and that were then left to figure out what comes next without any real support from the systems that extracted their value for decades. The resource economy took what it needed, and then it moved on. The towns are still there, trying to decide what they are now. The Mackenzie Delta is where one of Canada's great rivers finally reaches the Arctic Ocean. It's a place of extraordinary biological richness. Caribou calving grounds, beluga habitat, nesting grounds for migratory birds that travel from as far away as South America to breed here. The coastline along the Beaufort Sea is eroding faster than almost any coastline in the world. The reason is permafrost. Specifically, the coastal bluffs are made of it. When the sea was ice-covered for most of the year, the ice acted as a buffer. It absorbed the wave energy before it could hit the shore. As sea ice disappears, and it is disappearing dramatically, measurably, those bluffs are being hit directly by open ocean waves for more months every year. In some areas, the coast is losing 5 to 10 meters per year. In some extreme events, it has lost 30 meters in a single storm. The Inuvialuit communities in this region have been watching their ancestors' burial sites fall into the sea. Archaeological sites that took decades to locate are being lost before they can be fully excavated. There is a particular kind of cultural loss in watching the graves of your grandparents erode into the ocean. Not because of any decision, not because of any event, but simply because the climate that has been changed by everyone else's choices has made the ground unstable. When we talk about climate loss in Canada, we talk mostly in the abstract. Carbon numbers, temperature projections. Here on the Beaufort coast, it is not abstract. It is burial sites, dropping into the sea. There was a town on the shore of Yellowhead Lake in British Columbia called Lucerne. It had a railway station and a hotel and a small population that lived there because the Canadian National Railway ran through it. When the railway changed its routing and the station closed, the town simply ceased to function. The people left. The buildings stayed. Today, Lucerne is technically part of Mount Robson Provincial Park. The old hotel foundation is still there. Some structural remnants, interpretive signs that explain what this place used to be, in the past tense. What's striking about Lucerne, and about dozens of places like it across the country, is how quickly the transition happened. A town that was alive became a ruin in less than a generation. Not because of disaster, not because of anything dramatic, because the economic logic that created it simply expired, and nothing replaced it. The forest is reclaiming Lucerne now, slowly but consistently. In another 50 years, it may be indistinguishable from the wilderness around it. The railway will still be there. But the proof that people lived here, built here, raised families here, that will be gone. Canada is full of places like this. Ghost towns, people call them. But that word makes them sound spooky when really they're just sad. Places that mattered once and were walked away from. The Columbia Icefield is one of the largest accumulations of ice in the Rocky Mountains. It feeds 6 major river systems, water that flows to 3 different oceans. It is, in a hydrological sense, one of the most important features of the entire continent. If you've been there, you may have noticed the markers along the road. Painted lines on posts showing where the toe of the Athabasca Glacier was in 1890, in 1920, in 1950, in 1980, in 2000, in 2010, in 2020. Each one further up the valley than the last. The distance between the 1890 marker and where the glacier ends today is roughly 1.5 kilometers. The retreating has accelerated over the last 20 years. Glaciologists project that the Athabasca Glacier, the most accessible and most studied tongue of the Columbia Icefield, will largely disappear by 2100 if current trends hold. The broader icefield will follow, though more slowly. What this means practically: the rivers that the icefield feeds, the Athabasca, the Saskatchewan, the Columbia, will lose their glacial meltwater contribution. During late summer, when snowmelt is done and only glacial melt sustains river flow, those rivers will be lower, in some years critically low. Agriculture, hydroelectric power, and municipal water systems across 3 provinces and into the United States are quietly dependent on water that comes, ultimately, from a glacier that is leaving. The skywalk over the Athabasca Glacier is open in summer. Thousands of people walk out on it. They take photographs, they look at the ice. Very few of them, looking at that ice, are thinking about a dry summer in Saskatchewan in 2075. But that's what they're looking at. The archipelago called Haida Gwaii, the islands off the north coast of British Columbia, is one of the oldest continuously inhabited landscapes in North America. The Haida people have been here for at least 12,000 years, possibly longer. When the ice sheets of the last glacial maximum covered most of the continent, parts of Haida Gwaii remained exposed, a refugium, scientists call it, where life persisted when it couldn't elsewhere. The archaeological record here is extraordinary. Underwater sites, now submerged because sea levels rose after the glaciers melted, contain some of the oldest evidence of human habitation in the hemisphere. On land, the remnants of ancient villages, totem poles slowly being reclaimed by the rainforest, middens that contain thousands of years of material culture. The threat is coastal erosion. The storm surges that are becoming more frequent and more intense with every degree of warming are actively destroying archaeological sites. Some have been lost. Others are in the process of being lost. The challenge is that excavation takes time, years in some cases, and the erosion doesn't wait. In some spots, researchers have had to make brutal triage decisions, which sites to excavate now, knowing that others won't survive until they get to them. The Haida have their own institutions for managing this. The Haida Nation has been asserting jurisdiction over their territory and their heritage for decades, against considerable resistance. What they're dealing with now is a race between the sea and the record. 12,000 years of human life on this coast, being asked to be documented and saved in the next 10-20 years, before the water decides for everyone what gets remembered. Aklavik sits deep in the Mackenzie Delta, surrounded by channels and islands, and the particular flatness of land that was shaped entirely by water. It was once the main administrative hub for the Western Arctic, the RCMP post, the hospital, the mission school. In the 1950s, the federal government decided Aklavik was on unstable ground, literally. Permafrost issues, flooding risk, limited space for expansion. The decision was made to build a new town. Inuvik was constructed about 100 kilometers to the east, and the government strongly encouraged, the population of Aklavik to move there. Most didn't. The Inuvialuit and Gwich'in people who had lived in and around the delta for generations looked at this new planned town and said essentially, no, we are staying. The community that was supposed to die became a kind of symbol. There's still a sign in Aklavik that says, never say die, but the threat the government identified in the 1950s hasn't gone away. It's gotten worse. The permafrost under Aklavik is thawing faster now than at any point in recorded history. The land is settling. Roads are cracking. Some buildings are at serious risk. The Mackenzie River during flood years comes very close to the town's edges. The people of Aklavik stayed because this land is theirs, not in a legal abstraction, but in the deepest possible sense. Their relationships to this delta, to the animals that move through it, to the waters and the seasonal rhythms of this place, go back hundreds of generations. When they refused to leave in the 1950s, they were protecting something the government couldn't see on a survey map. They're still there, still protecting it, against the government's logic, and now against the planet's. At the southern tip of Haida Gwaii, on a small island called Escangwai, there is a place called Ninstins. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It holds the largest collection of standing totem poles in their original location anywhere in the world. No one has lived at Ninstins since 1880. The village was abandoned after a smallpox epidemic killed most of its inhabitants. An epidemic that moved through the northwest coast like a catastrophe that the Haida could not survive at the numbers they had gathered in their villages. The people who made it left. They never came back. The poles they left behind are extraordinary. Mortuary poles, memorial poles, house posts. Some still standing after nearly 150 years, weathered to silver by the rain and the salt air. They are being slowly consumed by the rainforest. Moss covers their bases. Roots crack their feet. In the wet climate of Haida Gwaii, wood decays. This is not neglect. This is time. The Haida Gwaii watchmen have been stationed at Ninstins since 1981. Haida people, rotating through each season, living in a small cabin, guiding the handful of visitors who arrive by boat each summer, keeping watch over the poles. Their presence is the only reason Ninstins remains accessible and cared for. Without them, it would still be there. But it would be alone. The question that hangs over Ninstins is one that the Haida have been grappling with deliberately and carefully for decades. To preserve, or to let the poles complete their natural return to the earth. Some poles have already fallen, some are beyond intervention. The cultural protocol for many Haida is that totem poles are meant to decay. They are not permanent monuments but living records that exist in time and then return. The Western impulse to freeze them, to coat them in preservative, to hold them in place forever, can feel like a second kind of violation. What remains at Ninstins is not a ruin exactly. It's something harder to name. A village that was ended by disease. Disease that followed contact, that followed colonization, and whose physical record is now being ended by time. The people who made these poles did not disappear. Their descendants are the watchmen who watch over what was left. They are the Haida nation, asserting their rights across their entire archipelago. But the poles are going. Not because no one cares, because wood decays. Because time moves. Because the conditions that made this village possible in 1880 and the conditions that ended it are both, in their own way, irreversible. When the last pole at Ninstins falls, something will be over that cannot be restarted. Not the Haida people, not their culture, but a particular physical, standing record of a village that existed for centuries on this coast and then was gone in a single epidemic year. That record is still there. Right now. Today. It is still there. Not for much longer. Every place in this countdown still exists as you watch this. Some will exist for decades. Some are already technically gone in the ways that matter most. What they share is this. They were never on the list of things that Canada decided to protect before it was too late. Canada tells a story about itself, of wilderness and space and resource and endurance. What this country rarely tells is the other story. The story of what was here before and what is leaving now. The indigenous territories that were mapped out of existence. The communities that were moved or abandoned or simply outweighted. The ice that is older than memory, becoming water. The coastlines that held burial grounds for 1,000 years and now hold nothing. Disappearing is not one thing. It's a slow process that looks, for a long time, like survival. And then one day, you go back and the ground has settled, or the glacier has pulled back, or the last person who knew what that place was called has died, and something is gone that never announced it was leaving. These places were here. This is a record that they were.